Welcome to the Link to Change podcast. My name is Hayley Brown and I am the Chief Executive at Link to Change. Each week, myself and my amazing guest will discuss key issues around exploitation, what's happening in the community, and key pieces of information that you really need to know about. So I would like to introduce my guest, the amazing Dr. Audrey Tang, Chartered Psychologist and host of Mental Health Matters on California's E360 TV.
Thank you for having me, Hayley. It's really a pleasure to chat with you.
Brilliant.
We have questions for you from our viewers because you were very kindly on our show before talking about exploitation, and that's generated a lot of conversation. So I was hoping to put the following to you today.
Yeah,
this
go
is
ahead.
The topic of the realities of sexual, online and criminal exploitation. One of the things that really came out from the show was about why victims of exploitation are so afraid to report their experiences. What's going on there?
Well, I think if we think about exploitation as a whole to begin with, there's so many different elements of it. So for some of our young people, they could be being sexually exploited, they could be being criminally exploited, there could be elements of online and even elements of financial exploitation that we're seeing a real increase in at the moment. And young people we know young people, they like to keep everything to themselves. There is a lot of fear, there's a lot of scaremongering, and I think the awareness around exploitation isn't there. Therefore, young people maybe don't even know that they're being groomed and exploited in the first place. And that then can mean that there is a fear of disclosure, there is a fear of not understanding what's happening to them, and the fear of not being believed either.
That is frightening. I mean, do you want just asking you a tiny bit more when we break down exploitation and what it is? How do you explain this to a child? How do you say to them, if this is happening, this is a problem?
What we're relying on is that we're relying on professionals understanding what exploitation is in the first place. So, to kind of think about sexual exploitation in itself, that in itself can take so many different forms. So we know it is where someone is taken advantage of for the purpose and gain of someone else, and that is normally through sexual means. However, I think there is a stereotype in people's heads that this is normally a grooming gang, and I know there's been a lot in the press recently around this, and they kind of tend to think that there's this group of males that then groom these young girls, exploit them, traffic them, and then they are taken advantage of in sexual ways. However, that's not always the case. So this could be a peer. So for example, this could be a young girl who feels that these people are her friends, that feels that they are in the beginning of a relationship with someone, and they are groomed and then they are sexually exploited, and that exploitation could be a long thing. That exploitation could be that results in that young girl being sexually assaulted.
It's horrific.
And that's not to say that obviously with that example, I've used the example of a female, that this could be a male, this could be anyone, this could be absolutely anyone. When we think about online exploitation, there's kind of two elements to it. So sometimes it is being in that online space the whole time the exploitation could take place. It could be that it begins online and ends up face-to-face. It could be that it's face-to-face and goes into online. And normally in terms of the online world, it's so much harder to understand, it's so much harder to regulate, because of encrypted messages, all of those different types of things. And there are some really strong cases, and that is where we are seeing the younger age range being exploited as well.
That is frightening. And when you're talking about online, there is in many ways a lack of physical evidence of conventional exploitation. And so how does this lack of physical evidence impact the victim's testimony or the ability to prosecute?
Well, it's really difficult. It's really difficult. So evidence is a lot harder to gain. Because of certain social media platforms where messaging is now encrypted. So you can hear the debate almost where some, members of the public say, I have the right to my privacy of my own information, therefore platforms need to make sure my messaging is encrypted. However, on the flip side to that, when it comes to something like online exploitation, that encryption is one of the key things that stops the evidence being there in the first place, especially when you've got platforms where they have disappearing messages, all of those different types of things. The other difficulty that you have, so you're then very much relying, if there is a case, that the police then have the tech and the means to be able to go into devices, into phones, into tracking. We're then in a world where the young person could be being exploited in Bedford and the perpetrator is based in Texas in America. So then you're looking at legalities in terms of cross country, where the case then sits, because it then gets handed over to a completely different country with different sets of rules. And the Online Safety Act bill that has come into place, that is being moderated by Ofcom, brilliant. However, is still very new in its infancy. We don't know where it sits. We then have situations where young people potentially are being exploited. They're then created indecent images, where that sits in terms of the legalities with them, and it's about, I guess, the police, prosecutors being able to understand that young person was groomed into creating those images in the first place. But then we go into a whole different world of victim blaming. Another session.
That was the next viewer question, in fact. It is, how does society's tendency to blame the victim impact on the prosecution of perpetrators? Yeah,
so there is still so much around media perceptions, media portrayals. As I say, we've had a lot in the press recently around exploitation, grooming gangs. So there is definitely a lack of understanding there. There is then the element of media I can't say the word, sensations, and how that is looked at and portrayed, and words that are used in the media. So people then tend to think that these are troubled kids, that these are, especially in terms of criminal exploitation side of it, these are dangerous kids that are up to no good, that are doing X, Y, and Z, bringing youth violence, all of those different aspects. And, words such as, it frustrates me when I will read an article, and especially in terms of online, where they use the word child pornography. It's not child pornography. It never can be, because the child is a child and cannot consent to those images and the creation of those materials. But those sorts of words make it so much harder when we're then looking at legislation, when we're then looking at prosecution. It's a really complicated minefield. But we're also relying on that young person making that disclosure, standing by that disclosure, because we know that then when we go to report to the police, that actually sometimes those cases, the young people retract because of how they've been treated, how it's been perceived, fear, all of those different types of things. It's really difficult.
It's horrific. I mean, what changes in that case do need to happen then in our legal and our justice system to improve the prosecution? Because I know that's something that you said on the show before. You can get something so far and then it suddenly stops.
Yeah. At the moment, we're relying on certain pieces of legislation to, say, include elements of sexual exploitation, to include elements of online. So the Sexual Offences Act, the Online Safety Act, it's all particular bits in each of the different parts of legislation. I think also the way that things are seen, the way that things are perceived is really, really important. We also know that prosecution rates, that is another key thing, where perpetrators, how they are being prosecuted does not reflect what is happening and what is going on for that young person. So sometimes you'll see that cases are dropped due to lack of evidence. I think in terms of sexual offences, for exploitation, it's like 1 in every 6 is prosecuted. And we're seeing lack of evidence. We are seeing lack of belief in the young person and their experiences. We are seeing then if it does get to prosecution, actually what is that length of time that that perpetrator is being prosecuted for? So you're seeing sometimes it may just be community service. How that then reflects upon that young person, the trauma that they have then undergone. They've gone through this whole court process, they've been really strong, and then the perpetrator gets 100 hours community service, which is not a reflection. So I do think the way that things are perceived, the way that things are prosecuted needs to change, because this is abuse. This is abuse.
Yeah, I always learn so much from you, Hayley. Thank you. I guess that was all of our viewer questions for today. Is there something that you would like viewers to take away from today?
I think that it's a key thing probably around understanding what exploitation is in the first place. And I think one thing that I would really like to touch upon is around the grooming process, and the way that those grooming tactics are used. I mean, the whole point of grooming is that you don't understand it's happening to you.
Yes.
And that, the tactics that are used, so it's around building that trust, that emotional dependency that they then build. Sometimes it's the giving of incentives, giving of gifts. They then isolate you from your support network. There's fear, there's blackmail, and it almost, all of those behaviours somehow become then normalised. So for that young person, they don't understand that this has been a process of where they've been groomed. Young people that have been groomed simply by someone being friendly to them, whether it's a person at work. So therefore they're working with them, in their little part-time job, and trust has been built. They feel that they are a trustworthy individual. Next thing you know, they're supplying them with vapes, they're supplying them with drugs, all of those different types of things. And they've built this relationship. But it's a trustworthy person because I work with them. It's a trustworthy person because they're in my class at school. It doesn't always have to be that stranger, and that is why it is so difficult, and exploitation is so difficult, because the word, grooming, I think, can mean so many different things. It can be a manager is being a good leader, and empowering their staff, training their staff, upskilling their staff. That is a form of grooming. Do you know what I mean? Exactly but it's in a positive way. And so for a young person or a child, a 7-year-old child, that thought process of, well, they're really nice to me, they're my friend. They don't have the comprehension to understand. Adults don't have the comprehension to understand the grooming process, especially when we start thinking about healthy relationships and all of those different types of things. Everything is in terms of a grooming process. So I think for me, it's about understanding exploitation, but also understanding what grooming is and how that happens and how that occurs.
Hayley, thank you. I'm very excited for our next conversation.
Yes, yeah. I would like to thank you all. That's all we've got for today. Can you make sure that you stay safe, stay educated, and let's protect the future for our children and young people. Thank you.